Hey, it's Aaron. Today I want to talk about tires. I've had two or three questions in the last little bit asking specifically about winter tires and things, or what tire brand I recommend, that kind of stuff. Honestly, I don't tend to recommend brands for a lot of reasons. One of the big ones being it's like recommending a car. I really need to know way more detail before I can tell you what is going to fit whatever you need the most. But I can tell you in general about tires, because tires get a little ambiguous. Most of the time, most people walk into the tire shop and buy whatever they recommend, or they just buy exactly what's on their car but new. So let's talk a little bit about tires. In general, there are 6 kinds of consumer grade tires that you're probably going to be buying. The exceptions there are going to be with like specialty vehicles and heavy duty vehicles. So we'll just skip those. We're talking about standard consumer vehicles. So 6 kinds of tire you're going to be looking at. You're going to be looking at summer tires. You're going to be looking at all-terrain tires. You're going to be looking at 3-season or all-weather tires. And you're going to be looking at 4-season, all season. There you go. 4-season or all season tires. You're going to be looking at, let's see, what did I cover? If I'd made a list, I would look way more professional right now. Anyway, you're going to be looking at summer, all-terrain, and then winter tires. And then the last one is actually a subset of some of the other types of tires, and those are low rolling resistance tires. I'm not going to get too much into those. I have talked about them in videos a few years back, but for the most part, low rolling resistance usually means less weather capable in terms of what the tire can do, but it means better MPGs and a bunch of other stuff. So most of the time when you see a low rolling resistance tire, it's going to be on a summer tire, a 3-season tire, and that's pretty much it. You may see it on an all-terrain tire, but that's super rare, and I don't think I would recommend doing that anyway. It kind of negates the point of all-terrain. So anyway, let's talk about these 5 kinds of tires and who needs them. So if you live where you rarely have any kind of inclement weather, where maybe rains once in a while and that's it, summer tires are perfectly fine. We're talking Southern California, Arizona, southern part of Arizona, most of Florida, that kind of stuff. Places where it really doesn't rain that much, it's mostly summertime all the time. That's a small portion of the country, but there are enough people that live in those areas that kind of tire is perfectly fine. And the good news for you is summer tires have the best options for low rolling resistance options, and that means that you can have higher fuel economy and other stuff thanks to that. So that's what to consider for those areas. That's a good portion of the country, bigger than you would assume. Next, we get to 3-season tires. Well, let's talk about all-terrains. All-terrains, that's a quick gloss over, because if you need all-terrains, you'll know that you need all-terrains. This is mostly for vehicles that are going to be on and off the road. They're vehicles that are going to be doing like, light and heavy and light and medium duty off-road. So we're talking like dirt roads that may or may not be curated, trails, easy trails, that kind of stuff. We're not talking like Moab Jeep crawlers and that kind of thing. That's a whole different thing. If you use all-terrain tires, then you most likely have an all-wheel drive or four-wheel drive vehicle. And if you have either of those, you probably, if you live where winter turns into snow and ice on a pretty regular basis for the majority of winter, so for say 2 out of the 3 months of winter, then you are going to want to think about winter tires as well, because you're going to have your all-terrain tires are perfectly fine for most of the spring, summer, and fall, but in the wintertime, they're probably not going to have the kind of grip you want, because the temperatures are going to get low enough that they are not going to be effective. Temperature is what affects a tire the most when weather gets bad. So temperature is, as the lower the temperature gets, the harder the rubber gets. The harder the rubber and compounds get, the less traction you have. That's how tires work as a gloss over generalization. So winter tires are made to handle very low temperatures, usually down to 0 degrees Fahrenheit. So winter tires make more sense if you live where there is actual winter. Now, I'm not talking about, oh, it snowed and the snow hung around for 3 hours and then went away. So we're not talking about like when I was a kid living in West Texas where it snowed like 2 times in my whole childhood. We're not talking about that. We're talking about areas like where I live here in Wyoming, where it snows pretty consistently and tends to hang around. That's the kind of stuff I'm talking about. We're talking, western states. We're talking like Wyoming, Montana, Colorado, so on and so forth. Upper portion of Nevada, all of that. Eastboard, we're talking snow and ice, so that's a lot of the eastern side of the country, especially around the lakes. So in those situations, you're going to be considering, if you're using all-terrains, you should be also considering winter tires. Now, 4-season tires and all-season tires. So all-season tires, think about winter tires if you live where it winters, right? But most people who use all-season or all-weather or 3-season tires, they probably don't need more than that. Because in most places, it does not actually get cold enough consistently enough for those tires to really need more than what they have. So you're probably okay with those. I ran those for a long time living in Utah. I lived in the Salt Lake area and the Provo-Orem area, and I ran perfectly fine on those and never needed more than that. I ran all-terrain tires on the pickup truck I had. I ran 3-season tires on the car that I had, and the other cars that I owned that me or my spouse owned during that time, those were perfectly fine. We didn't need more than that. We never bothered. Winter tires aren't really needed in Utah unless you go up and down mountains all the time, and most people really don't. Not as much as they think they do. 4-season tires, though. Most places where you have winter, 4-season tires are good enough. You don't need more than that, with a couple of exceptions. So first, let's talk about 4-season tires. 4-season tires are made for all 4 seasons. They are good down to lower temperatures, usually around 20 Fahrenheit. Most places where it's winter, it doesn't consistently get colder than that. Not for very long, and not. So here in Wyoming, we will have temperatures below 0, but our average winter temperature is actually around 30 to 35. So if you think about that, perfectly fine with 4-season tires, especially in a front-wheel drive or all-wheel drive vehicle application. Now, if you're going to 4-wheel drive, that's different. 4-season tires probably are not a good idea because 4-wheel drive sits higher and is usually front-heavy in weight distribution, so you're going to want something more aggressive than that. You're going to need something that can handle those front wheels only having 50% of your total power output and your back wheels slipping more often, especially in corners. So that's when you need to look at winter tires. If you have 4-wheel drive, think about winter tires. If you have all-wheel drive, 4-season tires is probably all you really need. Next up, let's talk about a couple of those exceptions that I mentioned. So if you live where it's very, very cold all the time, we're in the winter. We're talking Alaska with very extended winters, things like that. Upper parts of Canada, that kind of stuff. Winter tires are probably a very good idea. If you live where the terrain changes a lot, so in other words, you have elevation changes, you go uphill on mountains, that sort of thing, definitely think about winter tires. One of the biggest things that will cause you an issue with any tire when you're on when there's snow and ice involved is where the sun can hit to melt things. And if you have varied terrain, there are going to be a lot of areas that do not have sunlight long or intense enough to melt that away. So I'm thinking mountainous areas mostly. So if you live in those areas, snow tires are probably a good idea. But most people that run snow tires, in my experience, don't actually need them. So really think about that, because that's an expense that you're spending that you probably don't need to spend. Like I said, we have done perfectly fine with 4-season tires on our front wheel drive minivan, and I have done perfectly well with 3-season tires on front wheel and all wheel drive vehicles for most of my lifetime. So you really don't need to go to winter tires unless you seriously live where real winter weather happens, and it happens a lot. Most of the time in the winter, we're driving on bare roads. You don't actually need winter tires for that. So, yeah. Now, I await all of the people that are going to give me all the reasons that I'm wrong. Hit me up in the comments and let me know, because I know there's going to be every single exception because you live in some tiny little corner of some county that has something that none of this applies to. That's cool. Hit me up, throw it down there in the comments. I await that. If you have a question, you can hit me up. You can find me in the comments down below. If you join my members area, your comment gets pushed to the top of the queue, or your question, and I will answer it as quickly as possible. If you find me, you can find me on most of the social medias. Just make sure to DM or tag somehow so that I see it. But I am fully available for questions. So if you got questions, hit me up. I might have answers. All right. This has been Aaron. Talk to you again soon.